Welcome back after the nice break and lunch. My name is Bhaduri. I'm the group leader for Geographic Information Science and Technology at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. We are Department of Energy's largest multi-purpose science lab. And one of the things that we are going to try to accomplish over the next 50 minutes or so is to give you a glimpse of what kinds of GI science R&D we are pursuing in different directions, supporting the intelligence community and in the pursuit of GEOINT research. So at Oak Ridge, we have a collection of about 100 people dedicated towards working GI science and technology research. Our science focus are along three distinct directions. One is which we call our flagship or signature strength in understanding population distribution and dynamics at local to global scales, which Eddie Bright, who is the team lead for that activity, is going to be talking shortly afterwards. The second one is geographic data sciences. This is where we actually make methodological and algorithmic progress in GI science and spatial analysis, and which serves as an underpinning for all the other applications we end up doing. Robert Stewart, he is the team lead for geographic data sciences, who is going to be talking after Eddie finishes talking. The third leg of our science is what we call scalable geocomputation and visualization. Since we are the largest computing complex in the world, it is almost ironic if we didn't take advantage of the large machine that sits yards from where our offices are. We try to utilize them in terms of bleeding edge R&D, pushing edges where it's truly research, and we are trying to generate applications out of it. And that's one of the unique things about Oak Ridge is that we are housed, GI science is housed in the competing organizations, although geography at large is recognized as part of liberal arts in the academic sector. Here are some glimpses of our application areas. All the science that we produce gets applied to solving mission-driven problems across the federal sector and also even in the private sector. Population and critical infrastructure, energy assurance, transportation modeling and simulation, or mobility analysis. Emergency preparedness and response, we are actually supporting real-time operations, not just R&D. Climate change science, and then earth science informatics. We maintain over 9 different information systems for our sponsors, which run live from Oak Ridge. One of the key traits that we have developed over the last several years is how to work, given that we are a science lab, how to work across the mission space in defense and intelligence as well as science space. So if you think about the 3 primary missions of the Department of Energy, which is energy, environment, and national security, we have been working with multiple agencies in all those spaces, including private sector partners. For example, for the last 2-3 years, we are heavily engaged with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. One of the things that I think has become very, very important for us is to understand the shared priorities across the agencies, and then also transplant some of the same science we are trying to do for one over to the other one. So we are trying to build a more tightly coupled community. You will see our work both being put out there as scholastic output. We publish our work routinely in academic settings. We also have the mission to support the American industry, so invention disclosure, patents, and eventually technology transfer of some of our solutions out to the market is part of our core mission, which we pursue very actively. We have been providing leadership in GI science research along the most of the top-tier platforms that you can think about. This is GEOINT research being exposed and getting vetted by the peer community. And the latest being at the IEEE IGARS, this year's Data Fusion Contest. One of our new postdocs worked with some of our scientists and won the bronze medal out there. And Dave, congratulations, and thanks for sending us Dave Kelby. This things doesn't happen in a vacuum. We are actively partnering with our sister national laboratories, although we are slightly better looking than they are. And we have active projects where we work together. We have a strong ties with the academic community, including the USGIF accredited programs and also the new NGA Centers of Excellence, Academic Center of Excellence, going all the way from Tier 1 research universities to community colleges. And then we are actively also partnering with private sector such as GSRI, Digital Globe, Willis Corporation, Google, to see how we can really bring the community together and share solutions across that space. One of the last things I want to mention, as a national laboratory, we are very proud of contributing back to the community, is our efforts in academic outreach and workforce development. We are not educators, we are not universities, but what we can provide is real-world training. So we have an active network of scientists who reach out through their own networks to a wide variety of national and international academic organizations. We recruit post-bachelors, postmasters, and postdoc students. In about a week, there would be 37 new summer students who will show up on campus to work with our GI science research. And some of them will move on, or most of them moves on to graduate programs, and then eventually becomes part of the workforce in DoD and IC community. We have sent workforce back out to the Navy, NGA, of course, and then we have also started a personnel exchange program with NGA where we exchange people who co-live for a week or two and get trained with each other collaboratively. So that's one of our big success of growing this new generation of analysts from the new crop of new geographers that are coming up on board and bringing in this new thoughts of GI science R&D back into our operational settings. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eddie Bright, who is going to be talking about population, and I'll be back to talk about computing.
Okay, hello, I'm the leader of the Population Distribution and Dynamics team. I'm going to show you some very high-level highlights of some of our work. Okay, as our name suggests, we do a lot of our research is associated with developing models for population distributions and some ongoing projects that we have, Landscan Global, Landscan USA, and Landscan HD. These are all gridded databases in a regular uniform grid that depict population counts. The global database is at 1 kilometer, and the Landscan USA database is at about 90 meters. That also incorporates infrastructure and data activities. The Landscan HD data also incorporates some high-resolution settlement mapping we're going to be hearing about later, and characterization, along with facility-level occupancy data and, again, some activity information. The global database is what we call an ambient distribution. That is where people are at on average over a 24-hour period, any given time of the day, any given day of the year. This database is incorporated in lots of different consequence assessment models throughout the community, throughout the federal government. It's updated every year with not only new census information and census estimates, but also with new geospatial data and imagery analysis. As we try to improve the database every year, we incorporate new geospatial information and acquire new data, always trying to vet that information to see that it's going to actually help in the population distribution. And sometimes we end up just creating the information ourselves to use in to improving the fidelity of the population distributions. And as the Landscan name says, we're always kind of on the lookout for new developments. So instead of just projecting populations to existing locations, we're always on the lookout for where new development's occurring on the land. The Landscan USA database it's a 90-meter database. For the U.S., we have a wealth of demographic and geospatial information that we can apply to this problem. But one of the neat things about the Landscan USA database is the temporal component, not only the increased spatial resolution, but the temporal resolution. And so we have a nighttime resolution, a nighttime distribution, as well as a daytime distribution. That is where you go to sleep and where you go to work or go to school or these sorts of activities. This database the baseline database is updated annually as well, but we also have different scenarios for certain places, special events, certain cities like Orlando, where you may have hundreds of thousands of business travelers and tourists every day to account for all of you who are not going to be sleeping where you normally sleep. So, outside of the U.S., we don't have that, census block information or tax parcels. And so we'll have to refine this information, refine the spatial distribution using other sources. So this is showing the Landscan Global database, that the 30 arc-second cell. And what we really want to do is refine that data on down to the 3 seconds, just like the Landscan USA, or roughly 90 meters. And we've been working on this project for about 10 years now, developing algorithms that you're going to hear about a little bit more later to extract settlements using high-resolution imagery with some algorithms we've developed to extract and delineate the settlements and characterize those settlements so that we can distribute the population. Here's just some examples at the local level, kind of just zooming out from the city, the neighborhood, on up to some district levels. Kind of the whole city level. This is Kano in Nigeria. Every single house, every single hut in the entire state there you see, as well as every house and hut in the entire country of Nigeria. And I need to advance. Okay. And more than just extract the settlements, we're also characterizing urban areas, so doing some more of that second level land use mapping inside the urban areas. So what we want to do is use some of the same features that we're using to extract the settlements to define the industrial and commercial areas and the differences between the residential areas, between the formal and informal housing, some of the income levels that we can apply some other demographic information to later to help us with the population distributions. About 10 years ago, we started this project called Population Density Tables in support of the collateral damage estimate requirements, but we're also using this with the Landscan HD product, and that is, this database is providing us with average occupancy information for 55 different types of facilities per 1,000 square feet. And it's looking at the not only the residential occupancy, but also the daytime occupancy of these buildings, looking at both the average occupancy rate, a low and a high average, a low and a high estimate of what you might expect in each of those buildings. It also considers work days versus weekends, special events, and a lot of these buildings, there's actually an episodic population associated with them. So like stadiums, convention centers, a lot of times they're either empty or close to empty or really full. All this is contained with traceable provenance, so it's completely transparent with all our calculations and formulas that we use in this, and you can we've captured all the sources. We got over 30,000 sources that we're using for this information. All these are tagged and searchable. That you can see that we can go back to the individual journal article or real estate report or whatever we may have used to come up with a report for that population estimate. So by combining the settlement mapping information with the land use information that we drive at the urban areas, any other geospatial information that we can supply to the problem, along with population density tables, we're able to produce this Landscan HD data set, not only for areas where we might have census information, but also for areas where the census information may be out of date or just unreliable. Along the population dynamics route, we kind of have a couple of different approaches. Some of it's data-driven approaches, so looking at population distribution and dynamics that you can measure with data, either it's webcams or cell phones, social media, things that you've seen already today. And others are more activity-based or model-based. So what would the future population be given a changing climate or some other phenomena? For some areas of the world, population needs to be updated more than just annually. And in the Middle East, we've been doing this for several years now, updating the Landscan database anywhere from every couple of weeks to at least quarterly. Again, using some of the same information you've already seen today, but also, monitoring and collecting information on the refugee camps and just the IDP movements and refugee movements, and updating our Landscan database to reflect that information. Other things we look at population dynamics are things like intercensual movements, so the internal migrations that you might see within a country, the diurnal variations you might see within any city, the change between that nighttime and daytime population distributions. Looking at a certain segment of the population in the lower right-hand corner is just actually school children moving to and from schools in Philadelphia there, as well as movements around special events. We also have an eye looking forward of forecasting populations, and so we have a database called Landcast that's looking at determining where people might live. So taking population estimates and spatially enabling that population estimate to make it explicit using locally adaptive models, and this can be done with a variety of different scenarios. And I think I'll finish off with our global building characterization. This is a fairly recent project that we have where we're developing at the same Landscan global resolution, 30 arc second or roughly kilometer cell, the building stock information for the globe, so the materials, what types of buildings are being developed, what's there, and using this in a kind of a flexible framework that we can use throughout the world. And so with that, I think I'm going to pass it over to Robert Stewart.
Thanks, Eddie. So the Geographic Data Sciences team is comprised of a core of mathematicians, statisticians, computer scientists, geographers, anthropologists. We're all working on a range of interesting research challenges from satellites to social media. We're engaged in developing algorithms, uncertainty quantification, data fusion, reverse engineering, you name it. So what I thought I'd show you today is a little taste of just a handful of projects to sort of give a sense of the breadth and the depth of the kind of things that we're doing. We'll start off with satellites. The Primus project, which we acquired a couple of years ago, is tasked with providing an enterprise-level solution to the problem of correcting positional accuracy problems with imagery coming from satellites, manned and unmanned aircraft. And it might be a surprise to some of you that it still remains a problem. It was to me. The truth is there is not an enterprise-level solution for that at present. This team is tackling this problem with integration of photogrammetric, computer vision, and high-performance computing techniques to provide an enterprise solution near the source, automated, and at operational tempo. I'll give you just a taste of what that looks like in sort of a toy example. Here's a region of interest, and a problem child imagery was taken there. It's not quite correct. If you look, the road and the curvy road in the middle is not quite matching the one just below it where it should be. So there's two phases to the algorithm. In the first step, we rely on a trusted source of data, elevation, imagery, that we know to be correctly located, and we situate the problem image in the space of this extent. And then we use a very coarse algorithm for roughly but quickly positioning that image approximately where it should be. In the second pass, we employ a clever technique of taking a picture of our control data from the same sensor. We simulate the same sensor that took the problem photograph. In this way, we now reduce the problem to apples versus apples, and we employ computer vision techniques to match control points, features in one map into the other map. Clicker. Thank you. And so in this way, we now have a way to really fine-tune that location problem in the map. And we're able to accomplish, in this case here, about 1 meter accuracy for this particular example. And so now I see the lining of the roads is just fine, and we'll move to the next slide. And we have a relatively good fit if we just advance one more. Thank you. Okay. Another example, now moving from imagery to people, in particular buildings. We remember from Eddie's talk, we had a project called the Population Densities Table, and that project was tasked with understanding the ambient occupancy within a building, a particular class of buildings. So how do we get those estimates? Well, we can't go to every building and put sensors in every single building and measure every single person. What we can do is rely on what we have at hand, and there are two things we for sure have at hand. One is our own experiential knowledge of facilities. We're all in a facility right now. We know what it's like to go to restaurants, we know what it's like to go to theaters, we know what it looks like when they're high in population and when they're low in population. The other thing we have is we have open source data about buildings and about how people move in travel diaries and such, and a range of things like that. So we have sort of this data in the Wild West, I call it. So our first step was to develop algorithms for taking expert knowledge or experiential knowledge about facility types. And using algorithms, we transform those into mathematical representations of uncertainty about the model parameters we're interested in. Here we have a bivariate Gaussian distribution that describes our uncertainty about our model parameters, which are going to tell us something about occupancy. In the other lane, we have data coming in from the open source, in this case a website, Art Institute of Chicago. We're interested in knowing what's the average people per 1,000 square feet. Well, of course, they don't tell us that, but we have a range of variables that do allow us to infer what that could be under uncertainty. So we have these observation models, sort of reverse engineering models, that propagate backwards and tell us what the ambient occupancy of that building could be and the uncertainty associated with that. Furthermore, we're able to unpack that uncertainty and assign or attribute that uncertainty, what's driving the uncertainty, to particular variables in reverse engineering. We take both of those sources, propagate that uncertainty through to what we call the posterior, which is a learning step in the framework. In the posterior, we now have a fine-tuned understanding of what our model parameters are, and therefore a finer-tuned understanding of what occupancy might be in that class of buildings. Because we're uncertain about model parameters, we're ultimately uncertain about the model. So here we have a bright blue line, which is our best guess. The hazy blue area around it indicates our relative uncertainty about what it might be like. And the PTT project translates this sort of scientific understanding of occupancy into decision endpoints, each accompanied by a range defining their level of uncertainty about that. So what we've done here is we've taken sort of two disparate sources, qualitative human knowledge, Wild West from the open source, and we've piped these through in a transparent way, retained the uncertainty in that process all the way to the decision desk. Here's another project that we're pretty excited about, the World Spatial Temporal Analytics and Mapping Project. What this project really is about how to empower analysts, this is funded by NGA, how to empower analysts to not just get answers, but to really ask better questions. So what we've done is we've looked at the world of data that we have, open source data, big data sets at the national and local level, things like World Bank, United Nations, and the rest. What happens when we drop those stovepipes, we integrate this data in a spatial temporal context and begin applying and harness and empowering analysts with real, truthful data analytics, not just trend lines or bubbles floating around. What if you give them real tools to help them better understand their context and ask better questions? Two things have come out of this. The first one is the World Stamp database, which is about 50 years worth of data, 30 sources, 15 million records, and about 9,000 attributes. The other thing we've done is put an online browser, which is quite a challenge to get analytics, serious analytics run quickly in a browser, but we've accomplished that. Here we see some examples of the things you can do with it. What we have up here is, what I'm showing here is about 30 attributes. 30 attributes over the whole world. They all have trend lines. And my question is, what if I ask the algorithm to sort those into a set of common trend lines? Trend lines that are, it's clustering. What do they look like? I want 8 clusters, and I want to generate the most iconic trend lines the world has to offer over multiple attributes, multiple countries, multiple years. Here are the 8 iconic trend lines over about 30 attributes on population, employment, and violence. But I want to draw your attention here to this map. This map is not a typical choropleth where you see a color associated with a particular value. These colors are associated with particular behaviors. So now we have a space-time map in a static state. We're also working in the area of energy, sort of the pedigree of the National Lab. Here we have a project, just very briefly, where we're looking at the relationship between demographics and energy consumption at a very high resolution, in this case at block group scale. So we can make that connection using algorithms that downscale census data in this case, and understand how different demographies use energy. We can then begin to understand and assist planners and other decision makers on how they may expect energy use and energy sheds, as we call them, to change with new changes in landscape and with expansions in the urban area. Another area we're working in is social media. I think everybody is. Ours is Planet Sense. We're collecting an incredible amount of social media data, from tweets and check-ins to imagery, news events, so on and so forth. What we're interested in here is finding ways that they can seriously and scientifically support the work that we're doing. For example, one of the outstanding questions we have is, what is the relationship between people that tweet or Facebook check-in? How does that relate to the real population? In other words, if there's a rise in tweets or in Facebook, does that mean the real population that's there is rising and falling? We have a paper out in GeoINT 2015 last year that outlines a research agenda and focuses these questions in that one in particular. It remains to be seen. And I'll wrap up quickly by going back to to satellites and remote sensing for a moment. Here's a project that we are very proud of. Katie Corcoran, a USGIF fellow, scholarship from 2014, is leading this project where the purpose of this work is to devise a methodology for detecting mass graves remotely. It's a very challenging program, very challenging problem. It's a physical problem for us. We've collaborated with the University of Tennessee, NGA, and a whole host of others to do an actual physical experiment where bodies were actually buried at the University of Tennessee Body Farm. Some of you may have heard of that. It's a 3-year project where we'll observe changes through LiDAR and other sensors to sort of get a sense for what happens to foliage, what happens to temperature, what happens to surface changes. Can we detect these things from a distance? Much more economic and less risk than putting people on the ground, particularly in contested areas. I actually helped fill one of these graves when I was there. It's a great icebreaker when you tell people you helped dig a mass grave. But that's all that I have, so I'm going to welcome Bhaduri back to the stage to talk about how this stuff unfolds in high-performance computing. Thank you.
Great job, Robert. All right, so I'm going to wrap it up on behalf of Dr. Jibo Sanyal, who leads our high-performance geocomputation team. But following along the thread that Robert just talked about, that last project, detecting mass graves from remote sensing, I remember that email that Katie sent around to everybody in the group asking who would be willing to volunteer to put some dead bodies in the ground for exchange of pizza and beer. And within about 5 minutes, all the women in my group volunteered. So if there is a moral of the story, I want you all to know that. Okay? So I want to start with the history of geocomputation. It is always debated, is geocomputation a real thing, or is it, another buzzword that we keep using? Over the last 20, 30 years, we have been playing around with this concept, and the way we have been able to define it is that those are the geo problem that keeps the computer scientist up at night. Okay? It's not about just give me a computer and let me solve my geographic problem that I had before. So this project, I got exposed to early on my career at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. That machine you see was the fastest science machine that the nation had, Intel Paragon 150, with a mighty 150 gigaflops of processing power. And Dr. Yang Cheng, who has subsequently gone over to NASA JPL, and he lands the Pathfinder on the Mars surface. He ran this color balancing algorithm on that Intel Paragon 150, which was probably the first ever, at least in my view, the first ever high-performance parallel geocomputing at scale example that I could find. So this was back in early to mid-90s. Let me see the next one. All right, we can work big machines, but not a remote. All right, now you can see the difference between the pre and post processing of how the color balancing algorithm worked. Can we move to the next slide, please? Okay, Eddie talked about our work in high-resolution population distribution dynamics and how we are trying to use high-resolution settlement mapping to enable the latest generation of population data. We have been doing the population distribution work for about 2 decades now. And one of the new breakthroughs that has come in terms of generating base foundational data is pretty significant. So all of you are familiar with our open satellite assets. Here is NASA MODIS, the land cover developed pixels from NASA MODIS that you can find. Here is how Landsat TM at 30 meters would look like it. And over the last 10 years, we have been consistently investing in developing new algorithms that generate settlements better from high-resolution images and also do it at scale and fast. And this is what's coming out of our processing of high-resolution images right now. So in reality, if I can summarize in a single sentence, we have discovered, or we are discovering people who have never existed in the history of our civilization, because no census worker has ever gone to these areas. Neither have anybody taken the time to look through the satellite images that identify these human settlements. So it's a significant step for the community. The important part is to be able to do it at scale, and we have found that GPU-based architectures are giving us a huge, tremendous advantage of doing that. So we can take one of those features, and this is an example from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. which is roughly about 800 square kilometers. And on a very modest GPU-based architecture, we can process all the 3 bands, start from reading data all the way to writing data out. This is less sub-meter imagery, and all the processing is done within 15 seconds. So this is clearly a workflow that we are very, very interested in, and we have been trying to translate this into more of disaster response. So we tried this workflow out during the Nepal earthquake crisis, trying to understand where all the settlements were and where the post-disaster settlements were standing. It took an alarming 4 days to get to solution, which is, so we are working with our partners at Digital Globe, trying to figure out how we can improve the data flow in this workflow so we can get access to the data and move data closer to the analytics in this scale. So it's been very, very exciting work. Of course, we are interested in understanding how far can you stretch the biggest machines that the nation has invested in. This is Titan. This is the largest supercomputer. This is the number 2 after Tianhe 1A and 1B of China. It has about 64,000 GPUs, and we tried testing the NAPE imagery, which is another government invested in 1 meter imagery resolution. 4 terabytes uncompressed, entire state of California using 1 feature. Entire dataset was processed in less than 5 minutes. And what we found out is that the minimum time that you were going to be investing if you had a very, very advanced architecture was about 1.5 hours. In reality, it was more like 5 hours. So that was processed crunched to less than 5 minutes. And in the sweet spot was around 1,600 GPUs, and then it started creating communications issues. We are extending these kinds of approaches for developing core data sets for the nation. For those of you who do not know, about 16 of the core Homeland Security Infrastructure Protection foundational data layers are developed and maintained at Oak Ridge. And here's a list of some of these. One of the key ones is the mobile home parks database. The nation did not have a consistent one. We were asked to see how machine learning could help. We took the same NAPE image database for the entire nation at 1 meter, at about 9 trillion pixels or 10 trillion pixels, and just used machine learning and pattern recognition to recognize mobile home parks across the nation. In our estimate, we had 3 people benchmarked by eyeballing just state of Texas. And in about 3 weeks' time, they were able to find about 1,500 points, whereas the algorithm quickly found 15,000 mobile home parks. And it was far superseded the expectations of the data quality that we can. Believe it or not, this is where the advantage of sharing solutions comes in that I mentioned at the very beginning. The biggest beneficiary of this work is not the emergency response community, it turns out. It's actually Census Bureau. Because Census Bureau is by constitution required to find these things and document it. And the way they have always approached it is to pay somebody who drives around and finds these. And they bill by the miles driven. So an agency that has been asked by Congress to repeat the previous census at the cost of the last census, this is a magical solution. So we are working with Census in transporting these solutions for them. I wanted to quickly talk about pedestrian modeling at scale. We also often fondly call it people-shed modeling. We use these during border crossing crisis, including the Ebola crisis. And the simplest way to think about it is that if you dump a bucket of people on a terrain, where do you think they're going to flow? So this is where our quantitative anthropologists are working with the spatial scientists. And it turns out that people have inherently, they demonstrate some of the same features as a water molecule. We are programmed to minimize energy. That's why we always look for the shortcuts. We just mitigate for risk. So these kinds of approaches take heavy computing. Millions and billions of possibilities are first generated through this network analysis using high-resolution DEMs, and then prioritize. So you can quickly understand where would most of these people try to take paths for. The other kinds of migration analysis is long-term, over decadal scale, how people might migrate as Different kinds of environmental changes are happening, including sea level rise. So we tried simulating everybody in coastal Bangladesh using GPUs, and it's a very, very computing intensive task, even under a few scenarios. I wanted to quickly talk about this because this is very important. More often than not, we end up looking for simulating traffic for a variety of reasons. The transportation community has modeled from a traffic engineering standpoint at a variety of very minute details how you can generate these sort of simulations. But those examples have always been one-off. So one of the things that we have been targeting is to lower the bar and scale these kind of applications. So we have taken our population data, we have taken the OpenStreetMap global network, and we have taken the transportation communities models, including one that you are watching is Transims, which can simulate 12 different kinds of individual vehicles at that micro scale. And we have created a capability where you can simulate traffic anywhere in the world, including 79 countries where people drive on the right side of the road, which is left. I learned in one of those countries, so I'm very proud of that. So think of Fukushima, think of other kinds of disasters. We can now, within a matter of hours, simulate scenarios of traffic simulations at the individual vehicle scale anywhere in the world. That's significant for the community. This is a fun one. This is the famous simulations, space-time prism simulation of the famous astronaut's girlfriend who wore a diaper and drove from Texas to Florida trying to take revenge on another woman. What you are watching is that the way navigational systems work today is it's a finite time element analysis. So you get a finite time analysis depending on which route you pick. It tells you that it's going to take you 8 hours to get from point A to point B in Texas to Florida. What if the person was spotted on the 9th hour in Florida? So what this you are watching is where that space-time prism could have been. So where could that person have been along this route when you have 1 extra hour and still show up at your destination? So this is, again, very, very powerful applications, potentials for understanding where people might go when you lose sights on a target. This is the last thing I'm going to talk about is vegetation dynamics. We all eat, and that comes from agriculture. We are even now growing energy, which is bioenergy. And this is what I call the changing face of the nation. This is the NASA MODIS NDVI sequence on a daily basis. So you can see how the greenness of the country changes on a Julian day scale. The objective of the community is, can we actually monitor the vegetation dynamics in real time to get an assessment or early warning systems of what's going on with crops, because it's extremely difficult to provide physical security. These are not oil wells where you can just quickly provide physical security. So one of the architectures that we have been trying to put together is to enable that kind of pixel-based but time series analysis. The interesting thing is that one of the MODIS style, if you take one MODIS style, about 462 of these cover the entire planet. One MODIS style is 23 million pixels. That means 23 million time series. In the existing serial system solutions, processing 23 million time series would cost you 11.5 hours. And this game is like weather prediction. You cannot predict tomorrow's weather 3 days from now. So with experimenting with different kinds of architectures, MPIs and threads, eventually the winner was a hybrid architecture, a combination of MPI of thread that collapsed that workflow from 11.5 hours to 34 seconds. So it's orders of magnitude improvement, and you can start thinking about how you can operationalize the data. So do not come to me saying we have a data problem. We have a data moving problem. We can process the data. All right, so I'm going to end here and hoping that there may be one or two few questions that we might have. And I invite my colleagues back onto the stage.
Round of applause, please. Fantastic. That's great.
Thank you, Chris.
So I actually have 3 questions all related to your global population data set. So I'm just going to throw them all out because I think they spur even more. So the first one, kind of a trivia question. Are you using Eurosat data in your population database? You can.
No.
No. Are there any considerations, and this is one I find fascinating, are there any considerations regarding comparing different years in your global data set? You showed lots of innovation and methodology. You can discover mobile home parks now that you couldn't 10 years ago. And what does that actually mean for understanding population change longitudinally? Does your collection methodology change? I think you answered that one for us. And when will higher resolution global data be released? Actually, I'm not sure what released means in terms of your data sets.
Okay, I'll take that the second one. I'll let you answer the last one. One of the things we do with the Landscan global data is we do actually put a cautionary statement in the database, in the cover letter, talking about comparing one year to the next year. And one of the reasons for that is because of the way that some of these improvements are made. We're identifying settlements that may have been there for hundreds of years. We're just now picking them up on the high resolution imagery. So you might see this village or town pop up, or you might see another representation of it that was from a land cover that once we get to actual building or settlement delineation, we can see that it's actually much larger or smaller or just a different shape. Again, those settlements may have been there for a long time, but we're just now being able to capture that information on the imagery.
So the traffic stuff, I have to ask about that because that was actually my neighborhood, and my wife is on the traffic committee for the city of Alexandria. Oh, no. She's going to love this, seriously. So I'm trying to figure out, like, the street right off my neighborhood is constantly blocked, and like pedestrians getting hit by cars. So what's actually going on in that model?
In that particular simulation, what you are seeing is an evacuation scenario. That's why.
Every day is an evacuation scenario.
That is true. That is true. This was part of middle of the day evacuation scenarios. We were trying to evacuate a particular facility in Alexandria.
Got it.
Close to Alexandria.
Well, I may need to have you run some models for me.
Right.
Well, this has been fantastic. I do want to point out that in the sermon, or I'd say the reading of the scripture by brothers Bhaduri, Bright, and Stewart, I think I heard if you teach a person to conduct a census, you get representative democracy, but if you teach a computer to conduct a census, you get world peace. Is that correct?
Well, we'll take it.
All right,
as
fantastic.
the one.
Well, round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.